little technical difficulty. Okay, so when I look at the TechRadar, I see a lot of dots. And those dots, well, they all represent a lot of technologies and methodologies. They represent a lot of possibilities and opportunities. But the question arises, should I try and become an expert in as many of these areas as possible? Or should I really pick one or two and try and specialize in those? A company might ask itself, do we have the right engineers with the right set of skills on board? Well, at Netflix, we don't believe those are the right questions to ask. We believe there's another path for developers. We've evolved our own model for how our development teams work, and I'd like to tell you about that model today. I'd like to tell you how we got here. To do that, I'm going to take you on a little journey back in time, but first, let's start out with the present. The state of the edge engineering team within Netflix. 10 years ago, Netflix had less than 1 million streaming customers. Today, we have over 148 million. 10 years ago, Netflix streaming was only available in the United States. Today, we're in over 190 countries. The bulk of our Tier 1 apps that power streaming are owned and operated by only about 80 developers. They're supported by 0 test teams and 0 operational teams. How did we get here? Now, you might be asking yourself, who is this guy? Who is Greg Burrell, and why is he qualified to talk to me about Netflix? Well, I've been there for over 14 years, which in the tech world is pretty much forever. And in fact, when I started, Netflix was still a DVD rental company. Our business model was to put DVD discs in envelopes and mail them to customers around the United States. But Reed Hastings, our founder, he knew that wouldn't always be that way. He saw the future coming. And so in 2005, I was hired to be part of an experimental group, a group that was playing around with, as Leora said, this crazy idea of sending movies over the internet. All right, now that you know who I am, let me tell you about my team, Edge Engineering. We build and operate the services that power sign-up. Maybe you're not a Netflix member, but you've heard about some of our great shows, and so you want to try them out for yourself. So on your smartphone, or your tablet, or your game console, or your TV, you go to Netflix, you sign up, you become a member. Now you want to find something to watch, so you browse around, maybe look at some new releases. Perhaps you play some previews. But you're a fan of the Marvel characters, and so you look for Marvel's The Defenders, and you find that, and you press play. And within moments, you see that beautiful high-def picture, and you're engulfed in that story. Now, maybe after an hour, or 2, or 10, you decide to turn off the TV and go to bed. But you're lying in bed and you keep thinking about the stories, so you pull out your smartphone in bed and you continue watching. You pick up right where you left off. All that magic happens via Edge engineering. The majority of the Netflix critical Tier 1 services are owned and operated by Edge. All right, now that you know who I am and where I'm from, let's go on that journey back in time. Let's go way back to the prehistoric days of 2005. Now, I mentioned that the Netflix streaming service began as an experimental group, and that group operated like a startup within Netflix. Everyone had multiple roles. I was hired as a tester, but I spent a lot of my time setting up build automation or bringing up servers in the data center or supporting external partners or conducting network experiments. Everyone in this group had complete freedom, and everyone did whatever needed to be done. And working like a startup was okay because we were still exploring possibilities, still trying to get the Netflix streaming service off the ground. But then, in 2007, things had to change. Because in 2007, something wonderful happened. We launched the streaming service to the public. And the launch of the Netflix streaming service, it was a bet on the future of Netflix. And as such, the streaming group felt the need to get out of this isolated startup mode and integrate with the rest of Netflix and how they worked. And so in 2007, the streaming group adopted the specialized teams model. It's a very traditional waterfall model. We had 3 groups, developers, testers, operators. And we worked like this for several years, despite the friction inherent in this model. The friction was growing. And so in 2011, we decided to change. We needed to move to a new model. In 2011, Netflix had moved out of our own data centers, and our migration into the cloud, AWS, was mostly complete. And so with that, we moved to what we call the hybrid model. Now, you notice that this model no longer has a test team. Our developers have taken on the testing responsibility. They write code, they write tests, they run those tests. Our developers are also doing operational work. They're on call for late at night. They get paged at 2 a.m. when something's wrong with the system. Of course, they just turn right around and page send one of the operators, but it was an attempt to get the developers into the operational space. We also spun up a DevOps team. I was on this team. We were operational specialists. We were focused on the needs of the streaming service. We worked alongside the Netflix Central Operations team. They were called Core, and they looked after the DVD rental business and the new streaming service. Well, despite moving to this new model, we still kept running into the same pain points. And I'd like to call out a few of those today, and maybe you'll recognize some of these. The first pain point we encountered was a lack of context. You see, our developers, they knew the code really well, but they didn't know the production systems. And conversely, our DevOps team in our network operations center, they knew the production systems really well, but they weren't so familiar with all the applications and all the features. And so this lack of context led to a high communications overhead. We did a lot of communicating, trying to get around this. This lack of context also led to very lengthy troubleshooting and fixing times. During a service outage, when minutes mattered, we'd try and find the right people, round up the right people to answer the question, what applications changed? What new features went out? What are the known bugs? What's the state of the production systems? What got updated today? Who touched it last? And then once we found all the right people, we'd all get on a conference call and everyone would talk at the same time. So is it really any wonder that all of our production incidents had a very high MTTR, a high mean time to resolution? The third pain point we encountered was a loss of feedback. You see, our developers, they wanted to focus on code. That was what they did. They didn't want to touch production and all that messy stuff. There were other people for that. And our operations teams, well, we were really good at firefighting. We did a lot of quick fixes and workarounds. For example, if we noticed a performance degradation in an application, well, we just throw more servers at the problem. Or we might spend a lot of time constructing a really complex dashboard, trying to infer the health of our system, when in fact the right fix would be go back, instrument the code, and directly output the metrics we needed. And one time when I was on the DevOps team, we noticed that for one particular application, it'd occasionally start performing really badly. High latency, lots of CPU burn, heavy garbage collection activity, random crashes. Well, we're DevOps, we know how to do this. This looks like a classic symptoms of a memory leak. So we did what you'd expect. We wrote a script to go through and reboot the servers every morning. No problem. Felt great about that, pat ourselves on the back. Of course, we opened a bug against the server, but nothing was on fire anymore, so it got low priority. It was months before that memory leak was fixed, and there were developers who never even knew there was a memory leak. This poor feedback cycle led to a loss of urgency. The only people feeling this pain were our Netflix customers. The root cause of all these problems is really the fact that we were operating in silos. Each team, development, testing, operations, each team was its own silo. Our models had created specialized teams within each silo, and there were real efficiencies within each team, but gross inefficiencies across the entire software lifecycle. One time, the team that worked on the Netflix client for Xbox, they were waiting for a new server feature to go live in production. So the Xbox team went to the Network Operations Center and they said, hey, when's that new server build going to be released? And the Network Operations Center, they looked through all their change tickets and stuff, and they said, well, we don't know anything about a new server. Why don't you go ask to test? So the Xbox team came to me. I was on test. And they said, hey, Greg, when's that new server build going to be ready? When are you going to be done testing? I don't know anything about a new build. Let's go ask the developers. So we walk over to the developers and we find one and we say, hey, when's that new feature going to be available? He says, oh, yeah, that was done 2 weeks ago. We sent that over to test. Okay, this is really embarrassing. I'm a member of test. Why don't I know anything about this? So I asked around my colleagues, and one of them says, oh, yeah, I tested that. It works great. Then why haven't we shipped this out yet? Well, at that time, our servers were very monolithic, and we had a lot of changes going in each build. Builds were on the order of, long time. A lot of changes, and we were being held up by one tester, didn't verify one change. So I go find that tester. I said, a lot of people are kind of waiting for this build. It's pretty important. Have you started testing yet? And he looked up at me. He looked at me with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. And he said, dude, didn't we just do a new release like 2 weeks ago? What are we doing every month or something? I wish I could say that was a one-off event or even a rare happening, but that was common. A lack of context, high communications overhead. I literally had to walk from team to team, from cube to cube, trying to piece together the information about this release. Lengthy troubleshooting, poor feedback cycles. These silos we were in were causing huge levels of friction that was directly impacting our customers. Something had to change. But in addition to the pain points, there was another factor that drove us to re-examine how we built and operated our services, and that was growth. Now, rapid customer growth is a good problem to have, but along with that growth in members came a growth in employee headcount, a growth in the number of teams, a growth in the number of microservices, architectural complexity. And all that growth just amplified the pain points we were feeling. Something definitely had to change. But sometimes you just have to hit pause. Sometimes we get stuck trying to solve that problem right in front of us. We become reactive. We keep trying things. We keep hoping for a quick fix. We knew that throwing more people at the problem wouldn't help. We would just end up with bigger silos or more links in the email chains. And that pain we were feeling might get spread out or diluted, but it would definitely still be there. And our customers would definitely still feel it. And so in 2014, we returned to first principles. What are the problems we're trying to solve? What isn't working? How can we do this better? How can we get back to systems thinking, back to a place of end-to-end responsibility? How can we optimize our feedback loops so our developers feel that pain and then work to remove it? How can we get back to that place of continuous learning and experimentation, a place of continuously improving the process? Remember when we were operating in startup mode? When every team member was free and empowered to do whatever needed to be done to make fixes and improvements? How can we regain that sense of ownership? How can we get that all back again, but in a way that's sustainable at our complexity and scale? So here we are in 2019, and Netflix Edge Engineering operates under the full-cycle developer model. Full-cycle developers are responsible for all areas of the software lifecycle. They apply a developer perspective, an engineering discipline to all the areas you see here. Full-cycle developers are flexible, and they address each aspect of the cycle as needed. For example, a developer may be working on a new feature this week, and the next week that same developer might be working on improving the alerting for the same application. The week after that, the developer might be working on a self-service support tool to ease the support burden of his team. Everything in this cycle comes under the purview of our full-cycle developers. This model goes beyond operate what you build. The full-cycle model puts DevOps principles into place. It puts them into action by having the team that develops the service also be responsible for operating that service and supporting that service. This means that each development team owns deployment issues, performance bugs, capacity planning, alerting gaps, partner support, and so on. Owning all aspects of the software lifecycle creates direct feedback loops, and aligns incentives. Teams that feel operational pain are eager to remediate that pain by changing their system design or their code, or by improving their testing or alerting or support tools. Remember those pain points I described a little while ago? Our developers now have full context. They know the applications and they know the state of the production systems because they own both of those systems. During outages, during service outages, we no longer bounce problems between different teams. We no longer have to try and round up the right people to get the right information. Our developers have the context, they have the ability, and they have the freedom to quickly fix the service so that our Netflix members can continue to watch their favorite shows. We no longer wait for operations teams to come in place. We don't even have to wait for manager approval. We go in and do what needs to be done. You wouldn't believe how many times I've restored the Netflix service at home in the middle of the night, sitting on my couch, in my pajamas, with my cat sitting next to me. Okay, so maybe that sounds great. But what do you need to do to make this work, aside from getting a cat? What do you need to do, and what does this mean for you? Well, the first thing you need is a mindset shift. You need to shift away from thinking, I'm a developer, I just write code. Production, that's not my problem. You need to shift away from thinking, I just want to finish the deployment so I can get back to my real job of writing code. You need to shift into, now that I've done my first 2 deployments, I've got some great ideas for fixing the automation. I'm going to work on that. You need to shift into, I can't do a code review right now because I'm busy helping with the support request. The second thing you need is good tooling and specialists to consult with. When I describe the full cycle developer model to people, they often react with skepticism. Greg, they ask me, they say, are you telling me that your developers really install their own Linux security patches or tune device drivers? Well, no. We have central teams that provide tooling and expertise. For example, we have a team and we have automation that supplies our developers with the latest fully patched Linux. Our developers consult with security or performance experts, and they bring their own tools and experience with them. It used to be that each aspect of the software lifecycle needed its own highly specialized team, but with good tools and a mindset shift, a developer can now shepherd his or her application all the way through the cycle, from design through support and back around. Hi. I can't stress enough how important good tooling is. It's a pillar of the full cycle developer model. And good tooling comes from good partnerships. At Netflix, we have a central team that works on deployment automation. You may have heard of Spinnaker, our open source deployment tool. When Spinnaker was first being designed, I reached out to that team. I said, I hear you're building a new deployment tool. Come, talk to edge engineers. Learn about our pain points and our use cases. We don't need a tool that does everything. We just need a tool that does the right things. Let's work together to build that tool. And so today, our developers, they use Spinnaker on a daily basis to deploy their own changes and builds into production. And then they give feedback to the Spinnaker team. And when I say feedback, I don't mean we just open a bug or send off an email. I mean we sit down with the Spinnaker engineers. We tell them about our new pain points, our new use cases, and they deliver solutions. It's a mutually beneficial partnership. Our central teams are force multipliers. Good tools and good partnerships are essential. The third thing you need, in addition to a mindset shift and tooling, you also need adequate staffing. I want to take a moment, to speak to any leadership out there in the audience. Let me make this clear. This model is not a cost-saving measure. It's not a way to cut corners. You can't take the work of multiple teams and just dump it on your existing development team. It won't work. It's a recipe for disaster. Trying to cram in operational and support work alongside development, it'll just lead to quality problems, availability issues, and it'll definitely lead to burnout. When we were first trying to make this model work, we could get away with a lot of heroics, but that doesn't really scale. It always leads to a state of being one small step away from an outage. It leads to a state of constant frustration and anxiety. You need to invest in adequate staffing. Well, in addition to staffing, the fourth thing you need is training. Some developers, maybe they're not used to touching production. Maybe they came from a place where they weren't even allowed to see or get their hands on production. So we invest in training to bulk up our developers' production muscles. For example, we do shadowing. A new developer sits down, makes production changes. Well, a more experienced developer just looks over their shoulders, offers guidance. We run boot camps and refresher classes to bring our developers up to speed on all the latest technologies. But training, it needs dedicated focus. It's not just reading a manual or an article in your spare time. If I can speak to leadership out there again, the way to support your development teams is by investing in training. Fifth and finally, you need commitment and prioritization. Commitment and prioritization means the whole team, and in fact, your organization buys into the model. It means investment. You have to prioritize all aspects of the life cycle. At Netflix, for a long time, we tried to get away with the idea of we tried to make this model work by saying, developers, you keep developing full speed ahead. Whoever's on call this week, you do everything else. You do the production deployments. You put out fires. You work on the automation. You improve the alerting. You answer the support chat room. Well, is there any wonder none of that stuff ever got done? All we did was create a huge backlog of this production-related work. We were way in technical debt. What it took for forward progress was having managers who prioritized operations and automation and support work alongside new features and bug fixes. So, to bring it back to the TechRadar, we don't expect our full-cycle developers to be experts in everything. Our developers are flexible, and they move from one discipline to another. They acquire new skills as needed, and they apply the right mindset to all areas of the software lifecycle. We empower our developers through tooling, through training, and through adequate staffing. So, these are some of the keys you need to support this full-cycle developer model. Switching into this model wasn't something we did easily or lightly or overnight. It took a lot of time and it took a lot of thought. And there are some trade-offs to this model. I would be remiss if I didn't mention them, so let me highlight a few. And the first one, I'll be blunt. This model isn't for everyone. Even in Netflix, not all the teams support the full-cycle developer model. It really depends on what's the right fit for your team, and it also depends on whether your organization can make the necessary investments. And change is scary. Re-examining your current model takes commitment. It takes honesty. You might ask yourself, what's going to happen to our existing test team? What about our operations team? What's going to happen to those people? But change can also be a time for opportunity. For example, when we switched out of the hybrid model into our full cycle model, we no longer needed a DevOps team. But those engineers went on to other parts of Netflix. One of my colleagues on the DevOps team, he decided to follow his passion and his education. He's now a data scientist within Netflix. I myself moved from tester to DevOps, and now I'm an SRE in a developer productivity team. Our evolving model has kept things interesting and exciting for me. Change can be a time for growth. Another trade-off to be aware of is there's going to be an additional cognitive load. Your team's got to shift from only focusing on code to now owning all aspects of the software lifecycle. And your developers have to learn new technologies and acquire new skills. And there's a risk of being interrupted more often. You'll need to do more priority balancing. You'll definitely have to watch for signs of burnout and address it early. On the flip side, though, this model can be it can give you a sense of satisfaction at understanding the whole picture. Our silo models often left our developers feeling really constrained and in the dark. This model can also be a source of empowerment. It can be really frustrating when you know what's best for your code, when you know how to operate it most effectively, when you know exactly what's wrong with production and how to fix it, but you lack the power to do so. The full cycle model gets developers back to that feeling of being in startup mode, back to a place where you have a sense of control and a sense of freedom, where every team member feels like they're directly impacting the customers and ultimately directly impacting the success of the business. Now, in Netflix Edge Engineering, we know we're not perfect. We know there's still work to be done, and we need to keep asking ourselves, what are the new pain points? What are the new sources of friction? How can we do better? When I was thinking about this model and putting this together, a particular story came to mind. Now, as you know, Netflix is always hiring, so that means a steady influx of new developers. And so a couple of months ago, I sought out one of these developers at a team lunch. I said, hey, welcome to Netflix. How's it going so far? He got very excited. He got very animated. He said, oh, I tell you, today is such a good day. Today, I did my first production deployment all by myself. I now have my first feature live in production. I created a dashboard. I'm watching adoption. I'm watching for errors. I've already got some ideas about bug fixes and improvements. I'll roll those out next week. He said, I tell you, I've only been at Netflix for 2 weeks, and I've got my first feature in production. I still have code changes at my previous company that are waiting to get picked up by test. To be able to deploy my own changes in production all by myself, that's such a wonderful place to be. And that is the power of the full cycle developer model. That is the model in action, that engineering mindset that the developer showed as he moved his feature from design to code, to test, to deployment, to support, and back around to design again as he thought of improvements. When we hire new developers for edge engineering, we aren't rigid about specific skills and technologies. We look for developers with strong engineering ability, developers who will ask the right questions and challenge assumptions, developers who will reconceptualize our problems and provide entirely new solutions. There's always going to be new technologies coming along, and perhaps some of you will even create those new technologies. What we're looking for is developers with the right mindset, the right flexibility, and who are willing to learn and evolve as the company grows. And so, at the end of this journey, or at the current point on this journey, here we are. This is the full cycle developer model, and this is how Netflix Edge Engineering builds and operates its critical services in 2019. Our evolution wasn't easy. We definitely made a lot of mistakes. It took courage, and it took a lot of hard questions, and it took a desire to continuously improve. Ta-da. Thank you.